All right, on here we are going to look at the sine and cosine graphs in this section. Okay, and as I discussed earlier, the sine and the cosine graphs are all based off of the unit circle. So this unit circle that we worked on yesterday is where the sine and the cosine graphs really come from. Because as you recall from the notes on the first day, when we were finding the coordinates of this point, the x-coordinate of this point represents the cosine, and the y-coordinate of this point represents the sine. The sine and the cosine are the x and y values of the points, all the way around the unit circle. So on the unit circle here, if you look at the x-coordinates, here, x-coordinates all the way around, all the x-coordinates all the way around are your cosine values. The y values of every single point all the way around are your sine values. Okay? So if we take our unit circle and we mark this up a little bit, here's 0 degrees. Actually, let's do this in radians. 0 radians, and then all the way around we know this is 2 pi radians. And the reason why we're going to use radians is because radians is how you graph sine and cosine functions. Okay. So here's 0 degrees, 0 radians, 2 pi radians. We know halfway around was pi radians. Half of the half, this was pi over 2 radians. And then in between here and here, this was, add these two together, you get 3 pi, so this is 3 pi divided by 2 radians. Okay. And then if we did the coordinates of these points, the coordinate of this point was 1, 0. Coordinate of this point here was 0, 1. Coordinate of this point was -1, 0. And a coordinate of this point here was 0, -1. Okay. And again, for the coordinates of the points, the x value and the y value goes cosine and sine. Cosine is the x, sine is the y. Okay. So what we're going to look at first is the sine graph. Okay. Now on the sine graph, what we're going to do is we're going to start at 0, and 0 is going to represent 0 at our origin here. Okay. And then what we're going to do is we're going to unroll this. Think of it as a circle. Okay. We have a circle. We're going to cut it here and we're going to unroll it. Okay. So as we unroll it, here's pi over 2. Well, here, this is pi over 2. Okay. And then we're going to keep unrolling it. This is going to be pi. We're going to keep unrolling it. This is going to be 3 pi over 2. And when you completely unroll it, this is 2 pi. Okay. So these markings are already set on your graph paper, and they're counted out appropriately. On this graph, each block is a half. So this is half 1, 1 1/2, 2. And here you can see this is half 1, 1 1/2, 2, 2 1/2, 3. So this line right here is 3, which makes this approximately 3.14, which is pi. Okay? So this graph paper is all, the radian measurements have all been counted out for you already. Okay? So now what we're going to do is we're going to start graphing the sine function. So the sine function comes from the y values. So here, what's the y value at 0? The y value is 0. So at 0, we're at 0. Now let's move up to pi over 2. So at pi over 2, what's your y value? That's +1. That's right here. Okay. Let's move over to pi. What's the y value? Y value is 0. So at pi, our y value is 0. So we have a point right there. Move on to 3 pi over 2. The y value is -1. So at 3 pi over 2, your y value is -1. And then moving all the way back to 2 pi, the y value is 0. So here is your sine graph. Your sine graph starts off at 0 and moves up to pi over 2, moves down to pi, comes all the way down to 3 pi over 2, and then back up to 2 pi. So the sine graph is this wave. Okay? So now, how could we complete the wave on this side? Well, we would go negative. We'd go the opposite direction. Okay? And this is why we did positive and negative coterminal angles. So if we went the opposite way, this would be negative pi over 2, because this is positive pi over 2, so this would be negative pi over 2. So what's the y value? That would be negative 1/2. Or negative 1, sorry. Okay? Then we come over here, this would be positive pi or negative pi in this case, since we're going the opposite direction. So here, at negative pi, you are at 0. When you come all the way over here, this would actually be negative 3 pi over 2. Just like this was positive 3 pi over 2, this would be negative 3 pi over 2. So negative 3 pi over 2, what's your y value? It is 1. Okay? And then you come all the way around, what's your y value at negative 2 pi? It is 0. Okay? So this is going to come down and up, and then all the way up to 1, and then back down. So this graph here, this is actually called the sine graph, and it's a wave. And this should look familiar from maybe sound waves in science. Okay? And we'll talk about that as we move through the unit. Okay? So this is the sine graph. Okay? And we're going to talk about some more about this graph here in the next video.